Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist of the Tuscaloosa News, joined by longtime senior analyst Travis Ryer of BamaOnline.com. The Talkin Tide podcast available to you wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts. And, of course, we are live on YouTube and Facebook as well. The Twitter feed, Talkin_Tide. And we quickly want to thank Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa, a sponsor of the show. A lot to get into in this edition. We're going to be talking about the Alabama draft outcomes in the NFL draft. And, of course, we'll talk a little bit about that quarterback transfer that came straight out of A-Day, more or less, Travis. Some big news there this past week. A lot to get into. But, Travis, first, Bryce Young joins Harry Gilmer. The only two Alabama number one picks overall goes to the Carolina Panthers. Let's face it, if you're number one and you're a quarterback, you're the savior. You hate to say that or put that on anybody, but that's what the NFL is looking for somebody at that position, at that selection.
They are. And so good for Bryce. And then, as we'll get into, fireworks there in that 2-3 range with the Houston Texans, with DeMeco Ryans taking over as the head coach there in H-Town. But, yeah, Bryce through all the questions about the height and the size and the potential for durability issues. Ultimately, Chase, I just don't think the Panthers could get away from all that tape. When you talk about the quarterbacks in this draft, I think that was ultimately the deciding factor. Had to be just the consistency week in and week out for Bryce was there, and not so much the case with C.J. Stroud, who still went number 2, but more of an upside pick than I think a high floor pick. I think that's Bryce. He's the higher floor. He's more the potential for not only a day one starter, but more success in that role. Whereas Stroud, maybe you're thinking a little bit more big picture with him, but yeah, there he goes, Bryce Young to the NFC South. Still going to be down here in these pots.
No question. The consensus, I guess, among scouts and the people who talk to scouts who also talk in the media, Travis, ultimately became this on Bryce Young. Look, the accuracy, you can't deny it. The mobility, they loved it all. The knock wasn't height. I think at this point the NFL has passed the height thing, at least to a large extent. But yeah, it's the durability. In your opinion, Bryce Young being slight of frame as he is durability a worry for you if you're an NFL GM?
It is, but I mean, look at a guy like Andrew Luck. That dude wasn't slight. And what was it that ultimately drove him out of the league prematurely? It was not just the injuries that piled up. It was the burden of working through them time and time again. There's a mental aspect of those injuries too, when you're consistently trying to come back from them. So, I mean, I get it. He isn't the biggest guy in the world, and it's a position where injuries are a major concern, but they're not a major concern just for 200-pound guys, because we see every year 220-plus pound guys knocked out of the game. And in some instances, it's because they don't have the mobility that Bryce has. So
the pocket guys go down like timber. The pocket guys go down like timber. Yeah. So no question. All right. We will get back to the flurry of activity that resulted in Will Anderson going number 3 to the Texans. But quickly, just to recap the draft on the whole, Travis, and then we'll circle back and talk about a couple of these guys or more. Will Anderson, of course, to the Texans, number 3 overall. I want to talk about all the picks the Texans traded away to move up and get Anderson. Jahmyr Gibbs, a surprise to the Lions at 12 overall. Brian Branch, a surprise second rounder, goes in the middle of the round, also to the Lions. I was wrong on Branch. I thought, as far as his draft stock, I thought he was going first round for sure. Tyler Steen to the Eagles, 3rd round. Byron Young to the Raiders, 3rd round. Jordan Battle to the Bengals, 3rd round. Cam Latu to the Niners, 3rd round. Really a 3rd round bonanza, Travis. And then on the tail end, Henry To'oTo'o to the Texans, 5th round. and DeMarco Hellams to the Falcons in round 7. Let's start with Anderson, and then maybe we'll jump around. Your thoughts on the fit for him going to a franchise where they got a lot of building. They need to do a lot of building. It's a franchise that's really fallen on hard times in the win-loss column. But he seems like the perfect guy from a leadership standpoint to maybe go in as a rookie and establish himself as a real presence in that locker room, regardless of age. Because look, if you're the Houston Texans and you lose like they lose, it ain't the 33-year-old necessary that you're looking to, right, to put the locker room together. Maybe Will Anderson could be that one of those core guys.
He can, and it's interesting because really when you think that Christian Harris is already there and Henry goes there in the 5th, and then Will with the 3rd pick, you got really Alabama's every down starters at the linebacker positions just about from a couple of years ago in Houston now. And I think that is a bonus certainly for Houston in that situation with Will. You're not getting what you only believe to be the top defensive player in the draft, but he's one of those rare defensive guys that can also be the face of the franchise. In other words, we typically associate that with the quarterback position, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of that put on CJ Stroud too, but man, Will's certainly going to give you that out in front. As we saw during his time at Alabama, it's a role he's certainly not only capable of handling, but he seems to really embrace it. I know some of the pre-draft stuff he was involved with in Kansas City, Bryce too, sort of just spoke to that as well.
Yeah, no doubt. The Texans, the GM Nick Caserio traded 4 picks to move up. He had the 12, traded away the 12th. I think the 33rd, Travis, traded away a 1st next year. I think another big pick next year, 2nd or 3rd next year as well. I think they got a pick coming back, but that's a huge price to pay for sure. 2 first-rounders to move up to get Anderson, plus a couple other pretty significant picks. And DeMeco Ryans, the new head coach of the Texans and the former Alabama team captain, by the way, just like Will Anderson, they both got their cleats and hands in wet cement over there at Denny Chimes. He's he loves it. DeMeco loves getting a big-time linebacker to get this thing started.
He does. It almost had a feel there that I think I've seen this on social media too. The Stroud pick almost felt like the owner's pick at 2, and then at 3, the GM and or DeMeco were able to come back around and get their guy in Will Anderson. It's kind of like everybody walked away with Dippin' Dots, their favorite flavor. So everybody went home happy with those first those 2 and 3 at those spots, and getting really, again, the guys that you're looking at as being for the next 10 years, the faces of your franchise, the most impactful players. It'll be interesting too. I mean, you talk about just being really good people and really good teammates, like DeMeco was at Alabama and in the NFL, and then like we've seen with Will to this point. DeMeco was a versatile guy too, and I'll be interested to see exactly how they use Will. Will he just be exclusively an edge guy? We saw Alabama move him around, maybe to the detriment of not only him, but the defensive scheme last year at times. So how they go about utilizing Will, I think will be interesting too.
Yeah, it's my understanding that Anderson had, people talk about his sack production and that TFL production taking a dip last year. His pass rushing reps in games, Travis, was way down. I think maybe, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 fewer pass rush snaps for Anderson last year.
Cheetah.
That's right.
Look, that didn't exactly pan out. And we talked about it at the time when it became evident that was going to be a part of the scheme, that it sounded great. And why not get 3 pass rushers on the field together? But there were concerns about, how exactly that was going to come to fruition. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I get it. This isn't to throw Pete Golding under the bus, because when you got a guy like Will Anderson, you feel like you can use him. I was kind of surprised that Will wasn't even used at inside linebacker because I think he could have been fine there. It's just it's a tough thing to sort of look away from when you got a player of his caliber.
Quick thoughts on Jahmyr Gibbs and Brian Branch, Travis. If you'd have told me before the draft that those two were going to go 12th overall and middle of the second round, I would have said, yeah, I totally buy that. Branch will go 12th, and Gibbs will go middle of the second round. Reverse of that, and both to the same squad, that Detroit squad. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I had Branch going the first of the two. But when Bijan Robinson went in the top 10, like he did as early as he went, and that Jahmyr is the other back in this draft and at the top of the draft at the running back position, you were like, well, damn, that's great for Jahmyr, because obviously if another back goes here in these next 22, 23 picks, it's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. And it didn't take long. I mean, he came off at 12, and then we learned that there was a plan, obviously, for DeAndre Swift to go ahead and move him. I like what the Lions did. And I think to get Brian where they got him, that's a lot of value. I do think maybe in some ways that, you tell me, Chase, it spoke to maybe the way Brian's viewed around the league, at least going in, kind of a poor man's Minkah Fitzpatrick. And maybe some teams just weren't quite sold on him being an elite safety and or a slot corner. Maybe he was viewed as a tweener by a lot of teams, at least where the first round is concerned. Now, once you got in the second round, that's when the value starts to kick in.
Right. Yeah, no question. Yeah. I wonder if the slot corner thing, and I'll preface this by saying I thought Brian Branch had a fantastic year for Alabama in the slot corner and everywhere else they played him. I thought he was Alabama's second best defensive player last year behind Will Anderson. That being said, for Brian Branch to slip in this draft, I got to think maybe too many NFL clubs looked at him as a safety and not, and maybe not for whatever reason, a slot corner, because if they think you could play slot corner, that's the guy that goes in the first round.
Or they just take a corner. They just take an outside corner, and then safety value, as you're alluding to here, is where it's gone up. Don't get me wrong, but it goes up if you're able to do, in the eyes of teams, more than play safety. If you don't, that's typically where second round comes in. Jordan Battle was a highly regarded safety. He went third round. So it kind of speaks to what you're talking about there. And I think it's a good pick. You know what? I love Brian Branch, by the way, hanging around to get his moment on day 2. He didn't go home.
Yes.
And look, it would have been easy. And everybody else pretty much did. Will Levis went home. And nothing against those guys. I get it. But Brian Branch was going to get his moment. And I thought it was cool, too, that Goodell was still there to greet him on stage like he would have in the first round. So I thought that was really cool on Friday.
I did, too. Brian Branch hung around. Like you said, most don't. They really don't. In fact, I think when Landon Collins slipped out of the first round, I think he hung around as well, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to think of some other guys that maybe were in a similar position from Alabama. Jordan Battle went higher than I thought he would, Travis. If we're going to talk about somebody other than Gibbs who did really well, I'd say it's Battle. He goes with the last pick of round 3, so pretty much right in the heart of the draft, right in the middle of it. And I talked to a couple scouts that saw him put him pretty much in the same basket as Helms, even though they're different players. Scouts I talked to felt like they were in the same basket in terms of overall value, and felt like they were both, 6th, 7th round guys. But it just goes to show it only takes one team to fall in love with you for you to go wherever you go.
Yeah, I agree. I like Jordan Battle a lot in terms of just being a consistent player. I didn't think the playmaking as much was there in 2022. Now, we talked about it. Sometimes some of that has to do with design, what you're being asked to do at a position like safety. Just didn't have the opportunities or wasn't able to capitalize when he did. But no question that he's a consistent guy. He's a smart guy. He's a dependable guy. So that made sense there late in the third. And I think that, when you talk about that third round, man, it just felt like for a minute it was just going to be Tennessee and Alabama every other pick, because Tennessee started that run there in the third round too pretty good with Hendon Hooker and some of Cedric Tillman and some of their guys. But I thought it spoke well for Alabama, because I was thinking, Chase, it could be, 3-4 guys maybe on Thursday, and then not a lot on Friday, and then even into Saturday, it might be more 5th, 6th, 7th round. I thought Alabama actually had some nice balance throughout the draft, and I was wondering if that was going to be the case going in.
Yeah, I bet you there have been some drafts that probably the average Alabama pick has been later than whatever the average on this one is. We've seen some Alabama drafts, like you just noted, where you get a couple, 3 guys, 4 guys, whatever, in round 1, and then there's a little bit of a disappearing act on day 2, and then a free for all where a whole bunch of guys go on day 3. Alabama's had a draft or 2 like that, but this wasn't one of them. The third round just kind of went wild for Alabama. 4 third round picks: Steen, Byron Young to Las Vegas.
I wasn't convinced Byron Young or Jordan were going to go in the first 3 rounds. I don't know about you. So
yeah,
what they end up with? Alabama ended up with 8 picks in the top 100, 101, something like that. I want to say.
Yeah, Matu, I think, was 101, and he was the 8th. So
that's strong.
There's no doubt about it. Really quickly, Travis going to run down these undrafted free agents. There's 5 of them. I'm going to ask you, Travis, to identify the one, in your opinion, with the best chance to stick, as they say in the National Football League. Consideration, of course, of not only the talent, but also the destination. DJ Dale to the Buffalo Bills, Kendall Randolph to the Seattle Seahawks, Jalen Moody to the Cincinnati Bengals, Eli Ricks to the Philadelphia Eagles, and Emil Ekiyor to the Colts. Who sticks out of those 5, Travis?
Wow. You pull for Emil because he's the hometown guy in that situation. Going home to Indianapolis with the Colts, man, that would be an awesome story. Value is at corner. I think Eli Ricks still has a lot to learn, so it kind of depends on if he goes there as a undrafted free agent. Do the Eagles really have a plan for him? I can see him being the most likely practice squad guy, put it that way. Mm-hmm. He's the kind of guy that you see all the physical attributes and you think it's all there. We just need to spend some time with him, help him develop, and in a year we could have a top 2 round talent at corner.
I'm going to go with Ricks too, and
I think Ricks makes sense. And I'll say this: my next guy would probably be Jalen Moody, which might be a surprise, but I just see him as special teams. He was good in that regard for Alabama, and so he comes at a spot and at a position where he could help.
Yeah, I like Ricks out of that whole group, largely because I think he could be a special teams guy for Philadelphia. He's got physical makeup certainly for that, and all you got, if all you are is a really good special teams guy, and you're projected maybe just like Ricks as a developmental guy who may be a year or 2 years away from helping on the field defensively or offensively, if that's the case, but the scouting fraternity looks at you as a hell of a special teams player. Those guys start going in round 5. They don't wait around. Those aren't all undrafted free agents. Lots of those guys are coming off the board round 5, round 6. And for that reason, I was a little surprised Ricks went undrafted.
And you know this too, and I don't know, Eli, but there's a want to that has to be involved in that too, to be that guy on special teams, especially if you haven't been really at this point in your career. There's an AFC South team last year that drafted an SEC running back in like the 4th or 5th round, and he gets to the club and he hadn't played really special teams to that point. And so they're thinking he's a running back. Running backs typically help you on special teams, especially 4th, 5th, 6th round running backs.
Right.
So they asked the guy about playing special teams. He got in a lab. He goes, nah, I don't play special teams. Well, you know what? You might now.
Yeah.
You want to stick in a league?
You ever heard of the Birmingham Stallions?
Pal. Let me give you 3 letters, pal. XSL. Yeah, he was like, he laughed at it. Nah. He said, nah, I don't play special teams.
Not my jam. Not my jam.
Well, 5th round picks usually do, pal.
Mercy. All right. The Talkin'
I'll
Tide.
give you that name after we go off here.
You know? All right. Yeah. Full half disclosure.
Yeah.
All right. The Talkin' Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Going to thank sponsor right now, Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa. Travis, tell us about them.
You know what tomorrow is, right? Already May the 1st, dude. Isn't that wild? We're already through April. And so it's May the 1st and you got the kids and you're already trying to plan those summer activities. Now, Goodbread and myself are pretty much retired from that scenario, but it's not too far in our distant past to remember it quite well. And you wait too long, you get into mid-May, late May, and it's late. Stuff starts filling up. The chocolate camp at Peterbrook Chocolatier. You need to go ahead and get the little ones signed up for that coming up this summer, throughout the summer there at Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa, 205-752-0211. Do it today. Make that reservation for the little ones. And also for Mama coming up 1 week from today. You got Mama's Day, Mother's Day, and you know what Mama likes. Mama likes those chocolates. So you can couple of birds, one stone, whatnot. Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa.
Talkin' Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network, the Twitter feed Talkin_Tide. Travis, before we sign off, a few minutes certainly are due, on Tyler Buckner, the transfer quarterback from Notre Dame, comes to Alabama from the portal just a couple of days after A-Day.
I mean, at this point, Goodbread, is the damn leprechaun coming to Tuscaloosa too? I mean, Tommy Reese, Tyler Buckner. I mean, just load up the leprechaun.
Yeah.
You know?
Send them down.
Touchdown, Jesus. You know, bring it all down.
A lot of reaction, though, about this one, Travis. Mm-hmm. Alabama, obviously, and of course, it comes off of an A-Day, as we talked about last Sunday night. That was pretty disappointing overall from a quarterback perspective. We talked about a couple of the reasons why, but nevertheless, neither Simpson nor Milroe inspired. We'll put it that way. And a couple days later, Nick Saban takes a quarterback transfer. Hey, I don't care what Tyler Buckner has done or has not done at Notre Dame. Saban's bringing this guy in as a clean slater, Travis. To compete and see if it. Now I'm not making any predictions about who's going to win the job or how quickly Buckner might rise on the ladder. He might not bust a grape. Who knows? But Saban's not bringing him in with the idea that okay, he's depth. I think he's bringing him in to see if he can rise to the top.
Well, if you listen to Nick post A-Day talking about the quarterbacks, it was ominous sounding in some ways for the room, but certainly the two guys that primarily had competed for the job throughout spring. And that's not to say one of those two still won't win it. If they hang around, they both hang around. Jalen Milroe may very well end up winning it. Maybe it's Ty Simpson, but I agree. He's bringing it in to beef up that competition at the top. He wants to look at another potential candidate. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think it was presented to Tyler Buckner as, oh, you come here, it's plug and play. Because I think there's very, very few that's been the case with, if any. Nick's all about competition, and that's what he's looking for here, I think, out of Tyler Buckner. And, if one of the two guys or both of the guys throughout the course of spring had shown that, yeah, we're good with these two. Between these two, one of these guys at least is going to be capable of leading this football team, not just to wins. Nick doesn't talk about season goals, but we know what the standard is, right? It's
right.
compete for the national championship. And that's what he's basing every position on, not just quarterback. So if there's any position he can do this at, he's going to do it. And this time around, it's quarterback. And the standard at quarterback just in the last 5 or 6 years has gone way up. And just because Bryce Young moves on, Nick's not going to, oh, well, we just kind of got to step back at quarterback and just kind of understand where, no, if he thinks he can make that better, he's going to do it.
And another thing to keep in mind too, Travis, is and look, Tyler Buckner's had some turnover issues at Notre Dame and his action too. So it's not like he's got a clean record in that regard. But if ball security, fumbles, interceptions, what have you, is an issue with Milroe and Simpson throughout camp, and Buckner at the very least is taking care of the ball and hitting all the routine throws he ain't got to be Joe Namath.
No,
right?
No.
If the edge that he has on Milroe and Simpson is ball security, that's a big edge, and it might be the only edge he needs.
It might be, and he has history with Tommy Rees, and so I don't think that gives him the edge necessarily, but Rees is very comfortable, obviously, in what he's bringing in Tyler Buckner after working with him for a couple of years. Now, he only had a couple months so far with Milroe and Simpson. And look, it's going to get interesting quickly in fall camp. If all 5 of these guys are there for fall camp, especially the top 3 that we anticipate being there, reps. It's one thing to get 2 guys in a competition enough reps in August. But by that second scrimmage, everybody kind of knows the deal at that point or needs to know it because, you open with Middle Tennessee, and that's sort of a blessing also in all this is that you don't open with Texas right out the gate. You got that game. That can help you. That kind of helps you defer it a little bit if you need the extra time. But let me tell you, when you look at what Texas is going to bring to Tuscaloosa, especially on the offensive side where the skill positions are concerned, you don't want to be Ole Miss 2015 at quarterback. I don't think going into that game. You don't have to be, as you said, you don't have to be Heisman Trophy caliber good, but you're probably going to need to be more than serviceable. There's still going to be in this era of college football, whether you like it or not, there's going to be a couple of games a year where you're going to have to outscore some people, and your quarterback's going to have to be able to help you do that. And, that's just the way it is.
Right. And 200 on the ground and 150 in the air doesn't get it done in games like that.
It ain't 2011. And I know I see folks say, they're going to go back to 2011. Well, that's fine if your defense can go back to 2011. But this defense ain't 2011 either. I mean, you look at all the changes that they've got on that side of the ball, and then you also have to take into account the quarterbacks you're going to face, like Quinn Ewers, like Jackson Dart and or Spencer Sanders, like Jaden Daniels, like Joe Milton, like KJ Jefferson. They've got some legit quarterbacks that they're going to see, which tells me they're going to have to score some points in some games. I know they want to try to control games more with the run game. That's great. But just being the way it is these days, you're still going to have to outscore a couple people probably.
There's no doubt. The passing game is it's advanced that much with for a number of different reasons. But it's not 2011 anymore from a defensive standpoint. There's a different definition of good defense today than there was 10 or 12 years ago.
And you look at the skill guys around some of these quarterbacks they're going to face. You see Texas A&M's wide receivers with Connor Weigman. Texas, I'm just telling you, they get A.D. Mitchell in from Georgia to go along with Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington and a tight end like Jatavian Sanders. And, I'm not saying Texas is going to win that game. I'm not going there in week 2. But if you think it's going to be 13-9, no, it ain't going to be that either.
All right, the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Travis, real quick, let's close things out with some conference talk. This SEC's working group, which is putting forth potential recommendations for field storming remedies. Travis, they come out with. It was reported they've circled a couple of potential ideas. It really sounds like these proposals are in embryonic stages. But one is you lose a home game if your fans storm the home field to the school upon which the storming occurs. So obviously, as a for instance, if the rule had been in place last year, Alabama would be looking at hosting Tennessee and LSU both 3 years in a row. What about this madness?
Yeah, well, I mean, it hasn't worked with the financial hit, and it's kind of the SEC that's to blame for it, because the money has gotten so big that, yeah, you can say $1 million fine, and that's still a hit. Don't get me wrong. But you know, the money is crazy. It's not the deterrent you would think it is, I guess. So I think it's also
the fans don't pay it.
Dog whistle. It's a dog whistle to the universities and the cities that the schools are in. Mm-hmm. That if y'all don't have it beefed up enough for security, on field security at your games, then you're gonna pay for it one way or the other. You can either pay for it, and get it where it needs to be, or I don't know what they do, declare martial law or some shit. Excuse me, but I don't understand kind of what you can do. The National Guard come in or something. For every Alabama road game, we have the National Guard.
That's right. Well, the fines are never going to do it because the fans aren't the ones who pay it, and so they don't care. The fines are. I don't care if it's $1 billion. I don't think $1 million fine would stop fans. If they want to storm, they're going to storm.
No.
On the other side of it, if this home game thing is formally proposed, it gets voted down. I don't think it's not going to get the support because there's going to be too many ADs or presidents, if it got to that level, that look at it and say, I'm not losing that home game because of the revenue that goes along with that home game. So that's
how towns, what the cities would lose,
Yeah.
We're talking $15-20 million in losing a home game.
These ADs and presidents aren't going to take that risk, and so that's not going to happen. I keep coming back to what Sankey's alluded to a couple of times, and I think we've talked about it at least once on Talkin Tide, but it's going to come down to the getting the visiting team off the field with no issues as a separate and bigger deal than whether or not the field gets stormed. Because if you take all your resources that you have, at both goalposts, trying to keep people from storming, and you just take those resources and surround the visiting squad with them, figure out a way to get them to that tunnel, have a plan to get to that tunnel, have enough security to make sure they get to that tunnel without fans intervening with the visiting squad. To me, that's at the heart of what the league wants to do, because here's the thing. If fans go on the field and get hurt, like they fight with each other, or they're a goalpost accident, God forbid, you don't want to see anybody get hurt, but they subject themselves to that danger by going on the field, right? You kind of sign up for a little danger when you do that. Well, that's not the case with the visiting team. They just lost a game. All they want to do is get out of there. They didn't sign up to interact with the fans. And so really, at the end of the day, Travis, I think field storming is more of a school problem than a conference problem. But home fan versus visiting player interaction / potential violence, that's a bigger conference problem than a school problem.
Well, I mean, you look at press conference setups. There's a reason why there's a cooling off period for the losing team at a lot of those.
Yeah.
Right? And that's after they get to the locker room.
That's right.
So you're already saying that you know that there needs to be that sort of buffer between clock hitting zeros and when you even have them in a formal press setting. You know, you got overtime losses or 1-point losses, and here comes everybody on the field, and players are pissed and emotional.
Right.
You know, there's no reason for anyone to put their hands on people, but if you're gonna present a threat, or you're gonna basically get up on somebody in that situation, you buy the ticket, you take the ride. Unfortunately, I think, and you know, I think in some ways it's the league doesn't want this, but you know the league just needs Alabama to go back to 7-6. There wouldn't be as many of these. You know,
take care of that problem pretty quick. All right. That is going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. Join us again next week for the Sunday Nighter. For Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread of the Tuscaloosa News. Again, this is the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Sports Network, and we'll talk to you next time on Talkin Tide.